Hi, I'm Norm Stockton. Welcome to my home studio here in Orange County, California. I'm here today with the Gallien-Krueger 2001 RB. This is the flagship of GK's acclaimed RB series of analog-based amplifiers. Extremely high current capacity amps that results in just some pretty unparalleled punch and headroom and responsiveness. Really, really cool stuff. Dual 540 watt amplifiers that you can run separate multiple cabinets under each amplifier down to a 2 ohm load, or you can run it in bridged mode for 1080 watts into a 4 ohm load. Pretty staggering stuff. In addition, there are still 2 dedicated 50 watt amplifiers for the horns to run it in biamp mode, which we'll talk about in a second. This is my favorite amplifier. When I used to be on the road with Lincoln Brewster, and we used to do lots of festivals, and typically the event promoter would have whatever standard rock rig sitting there, and but sometimes they would read the writer and they would actually have the 2001 RB per my request with a Neo 412 cabinet, and that was absolutely stunning across the board. And it's something that I kind of refer to as the 810 killer, if you know what I mean. It totally does the grindy rock thing, but in addition, it totally has that take your head off Marcus Miller type tone. Very, very versatile rig. And in dual mono mode, it can power up to 6 8-ohm cabinets. Pretty unreal. 3 rack space unit, designed and built in the US. Awesome stuff. In the typical fashion, I'm going to go ahead and just quickly give a run through of the features on the front and rear panels, and then we'll go control by control, and you can kind of hear what's going on. I always want to encourage people to maybe plug in some headphones or a speaker so you can really hear what's going on, because low end doesn't convey very well on iPhone speakers or your laptop. So anyway, here we go. So starting on the left side of the front panel, you have your input jack, which helps for tone, obviously. And then you've got your input attenuator, your tuning mute, and a switch that allows you to select between your channel A and your channel B. Channel B is your sort of your dirty or overdrive channel. We'll talk about that. It's got some tone flexibility here. Channel A settings there. And then you have your voicing filters, which allow you to really kind of tweak the tone, and it's good stuff. We'll talk about those in a second. You have GK's signature 4-band EQ, active EQ, great stuff. You have Boost, which is GK's proprietary growl feature, which we'll talk about. Very, very appropriate, especially for the 2001 being such a great rock rig. You have got your tweeter and woofer level controls independently for biamp mode, as well as high cut buttons for each that we'll talk about as well. Your Power Protect LED, which is very helpful. It has some features that kind of give you an idea of when everything's running well and when it's not. Then you have your power switch. On the rear panel, you have your balanced DI with a ground lift and pre and post EQ button, as well as a DI level knob, which is a super helpful feature. Foot switch jack for the provided foot switch, very cool. We'll talk about that in just a second as well. Effects center return, tuner out jack. You have your chain in and chain out, and that allows you to daisy chain multiple 2001 RBs. Now, that's not to be confused with the chain out feature of the MVP powered enclosure cabinets. It's a different thing. We'll talk about that as well. In addition, you have a remote trigger, which allows multiple 2001 RBs to be started up, powered up just from switching on the power of one of the units. And then you have your quarter-inch speaker outputs as well as your speak-on outputs. And the speak-on outputs are for using GK's proprietary speaker cable that allows you to send a biamp signal down one speaker cable. In addition, there's the dual mono and bridge mode selector, which allows you to either run, like I said, the dual 540 watts in dual mono mode, or you can bridge it together for the 1080 watts into a 4 ohm load. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the front panel. So starting on the left side, you've got the input jack. Plug your instrument in there, and then you have your input attenuator, which is a 10 dB pad. If you're playing an instrument with a lot of output, or you're doing something kind of particularly bombastic, then sometimes that clip LED will light up there. And so this allows you to attenuate it if you need to make sure that nothing's clipping at the input stages. There's a tuning mute, which works amazingly well because it allows you to have your tuner always plugged into that jack on the back, and it makes it where you can tune between songs and not have the signal going to the outputs or to the front of house. And I love the fact that there's that big bright red LED, so it makes it where it's sort of an idiot-proof control. In addition, you have this channel A and channel B selector. So the way the 2001 works is that you have your channel B, which is your sort of your clipping or your overdrive settings, gives it some dirt. So the degree to which you're pushing the input stages is determined by this gain knob. So you can really make it dirty by cranking that, or you can make it much more subtle by doing this. Now, what's cool is that you have your level control that allows you to independently dial in the output level, overall output level of that channel relative to what's happening with channel A, the clean channel, right? So you can really drive it hard, but then bring this level down just a hair so that it's going to be the same level as your channel A or whatever. Or if you want channel B to be actually like something where you step on the foot switch and it really kicks it up a notch, then you can have this up a little bit higher. But I'm wanting to not distort my input stages, so I'm going to leave this level down a bit. But here, let's let you kind of hear what's going on. Hear the crunch factor? So at these lower settings, then you'd bring the level up. I'll bring that down just a hair and then bring up the gain. So that's fairly overt, but you can make it as overt or as subtle as you want, you know. And in addition, you have your EQ controls here, so you can bring in a little bit of edge, which is the treble, right? Or your bottom or your bass. Kind of thins it out, right? So I'm going to go ahead and kind of leave it flat right now. And then in addition, you have your channel A. So it makes it where if you are doing most of your stuff needing more of a clean signal, then channel A can be that. Okay. I'm not using the foot switch right now, but again, this is foot switchable. So with the foot switch that comes from GK, by the way, with this amp, you can mute the horns if you want to. So if you don't want any sort of high end in the signal, or, you know, I mean, obviously if you're using GK cabinets, then they're full range speakers. So there's still a decent amount of high end, but if you don't want the stuff that's coming out of the horns, you can mute the horns, as well as you can select between channel A and channel B, and there's a tuning mute. It's all in the pedal. So you can either use that switch, that button on the actual amp, or you can use this, okay? So moving on to the voicing filters, you have this 4 or 5 string bass selector, and it's basically sort of pre-built EQ down in the 20 hertz range. So it's really getting down in there into the subs. So if you engage it, then it's in 5-string mode, and it's definitely getting down into the 20 hertz range. Me personally, I play 5-string basses almost exclusively, but I almost never engage this because I just really personally prefer the voicing of the 4-string mode. But again, that's the beautiful thing with all of the GK amps, is that you can, you know, tone is a subjective thing based upon your personal preferences, as well as the type of music you're playing, and sometimes even the venue and the acoustics of that venue. So it's nice to have that flexibility. But in this case, I generally will leave that unengaged. However, listen to this. So it definitely gets into the subs there. But I'll leave that unengaged for right now. And then you have your contour, which is a bit of a smiley face EQ. And basically what that boils down to is at 500 hertz, it's all the way off right in the counterclockwise mode. And so it's flat. And then the more you engage it, then the more it'll drop at 500 and bump up the lows and the highs, okay? So listen to this. It kind of gives it a scooped out, maybe a little bit more of a modern sound. right? So again, depending on what you're trying to do, very helpful feature. And then you have your presence, which is your high end up around 10K. Which is, again, helpful for, whether you're doing any sort of anything where you're using some of those treble frequencies. And then you have GK's famous 4-band active EQ. Goes all the way back to the 800 RB, still sounds great all these years later. With your highs, right? Your high mids. Really allows a really broad range of tones. My personal preferences for lots of fingerstyle stuff, and especially when I'm doing some of the fusion stuff, I tend to like to roll off the mids to about 9 o'clock, but again, personal preferences. Low mids. Or you can really thin it out. Right? Again, I'll run those about flat. With your low end, I'm going to be really careful with this so I don't distort my recording here. Pretty powerful stuff. And I'll run that about flat. So moving down, you have the boost knob, and this is GK's signature growl. And what it does, when you engage it, it sort of introduces a little bit of distortion. It's good distortion, though. And it's sort of the sound that GK is known for. Check it out. Hear how it kind of gets polite when you turn it down? Right? So I usually leave that at about 12 o'clock or so. Now, with the biamp controls, the beautiful thing, with that boost knob, it's introducing a little bit of distortion. That tends to sound better in the woofer than it does in the tweeter or the horn. And so there's an internal crossover that sends everything at 5K and above to the horn. And you can independently control the level of that output with this knob here. Now, in addition, there's this high cut button that allows you to get rid of anything at 10K or higher, which is, sometimes if you have a hissy situation, then you can get rid of some of the hiss with that. And then with your woofer or your main, you're getting the full range signal because GK's cabinets and the speakers in those cabinets are very full range. And so a lot of times that sounds perfect. But if you did want to get rid of any of the high end that you're sending to those woofers, then this high cut also cuts everything above 5K. So you can see that the 2001 has all sorts of different tonal possibilities. Moving down, you have the Power Protect LED. And even that is a cool feature on this amp because what happens is when you first fire up the amp, it flashes for about 5 seconds and then it turns blue and you're ready to go. If it ever flashes orange, that means that it's getting dirty power or possibly it's overheating, although the amp is very disinclined to overheat because it has fans and it runs cool anyway. But if it's ever flashing orange, maybe you're getting bad power or whatever. It lets you know that there's an issue and it'll stop once the issue is resolved. And when you turn the amp off, then it's green. So it kind of lets you know that you're getting power anyway, but the amp is off. Okay, cool stuff. And then there's the power button. And then on the rear panel, you have GK's great sounding balanced DI. And a lot of amplifiers have built-in DIs that don't sound so good. And when you get to the venue and you're talking to the tech people and saying, hey, can I just get the line and I'll just plug it directly into the head? They're grimacing and and trying to talk you out of it. The GK stuff is dead quiet, sounds great, and I've never had an issue. Very cool stuff. There's also a ground lift button, which is obviously helpful, pre and post EQ, which is, again, super helpful because you may be doing something radical to your EQ based upon your proximity to the cabinet, or for whatever reason, you may want to just have radical EQ settings to have it sound right where you're standing, but that may not serve the front of house person very well. So you can send them a pre-EQ signal and it works really well. In addition, there's a DI level knob, so that's really great. You don't need to change any of your settings on the front panel. You can just independently either raise or lower the signal that you're sending them. There's a foot switch jack, as well as an effects send and return. So if you have an outboard effect, then you can put that into your effect loop. There's a tuning jack on the rear panel, which again works in conjunction with this tuning mute with that big red LED. So anytime this is engaged, your signal is still going out the tuning jack, so you can tune between songs without having everybody in the venue participating in that endeavor. In addition, you have your chain in, chain out. And this allows you to daisy chain multiple 2001 RBs together, should you ever want a gazillion watts and absolutely bring the roof down on your audience. It should be noted, by the way, that this chain in, chain out is not the same as the chain out function that's associated with the MVP series of powered enclosures. This is for daisy chaining 2001 RBs together. I don't want you to damage your MVP enclosures that way, okay? In addition, you have remote trigger, which allows you to power up multiple 2001 RBs together. So when you have those hooked up that way, then basically you could power up the first one and it'll sequentially power up the successive ones, but it'll make it where they don't all power on at once and trip the circuit breaker in the venue. In addition, you have your quarter-inch speaker outputs as well as your speak-on outputs. And again, those speak-on outputs are for GK's proprietary speak-on cables. Those are wired specifically to allow bi-amping. So in one cable, you're sending signal to the horn as well as the woofer, okay? You don't want to just find any old speak-on cable rather, at the venue, because those are probably not wired the same way. Lastly, you have your selector button for either dual mono or bridge mode. And this, again, allows you to operate the 2001 RB as two 540 watt amplifiers or as one 1080 watt amplifier. This head is really designed for anything that the touring musician is going to encounter. And for a detailed explanation of anything that we didn't cover in detail, definitely contact GK directly, or you can download the owner's manual at Gallien.com. But the 2001 really is the ultimate bass amp in terms of tone, power, punch, versatility, all that, and it's built like a tank as well. It is definitely the big daddy of the RB series of bass amplifiers from GK. It's just analog goodness. You're going to love it. I always encourage people not to just take my word on it, though. Definitely go by a GK dealer and check it out for yourself. I know you will agree. But in addition, you can also go to Gallien.com for further information. But this is the 2001 RB from Gallien-Krueger. Check it out. God bless you. I'm Norm Stockton. I hope to see you on the road.